to construct a complete profile of his personality, there's insufficient information in this particular instance that you just can't make a profile.
It can't be done.
Can't be done.
I mitten av 70-talets USA började en ny sorts brott ta form i det amerikanska samhället. Från kust till kust mötte polisen brutala brott utan tydliga motiv. Förövare verkade döda helt slumpmässigt, igen och igen och igen. Det fanns inga mönster, ingen koppling mellan mördare och offer. Bara kaos. Men mitt i allt detta kaos trädde en man fram med en idé som skulle förändra brottsutredningar för all framtid. Hans namn var Robert Ressler. Och man kan säga att Ressler är grundaren till gärningsmannaprofilen. Som tonåring fascinerades Ressler av berättelserna om The Lipstick Killer. Vad drev en människa till att mörda? Intresset växte snart till besatthet när han senare upptäckte att John Wayne Gacy, en av USAs mest ökända seriemördare, inte bara hade vuxit upp i samma kvarter som honom utan också hade varit med i samma scoutkår. Ressler började sin bana inom armén där han arbetade som militärutredare. Efter flera år, bland annat i Tyskland och i Thailand, gick han vidare till FBI. Där blev han en av pionjärerna i något som skulle kallas Behavioral Science Unit. En liten grupp specialister som inte bara försökte förstå själva brottet utan också förstå gärningsmannen. Tillsammans med kollegan John Douglas intervjuade han och Ressler några av historiens mest avskyvärda mördare. Personer som Edmund Kemper, David Berkovich och Ted Bundy. De tittade på deras historia, började analysera deras barndomar, deras beteendemönster, deras sätt att tänka. Det var under den här perioden som Ressler för första gången började använda begreppet serial killer, seriemördare. En mycket enkel men revolutionerande idé. Att vissa mördare inte drivs av hämnd eller pengar utan av ett tvång, ett inre behov. Ressler var inte bara teoretiker bakom ett skrivbord. Han var även ute på fältet och var med och löste några av de mest kända fallen i USAs kriminalhistoria. Efter pensionen blev han föreläsare och rådgivare. Över hela världen kallades han in för att hjälpa till i hopplösa, olösta fall. Från London till Sydafrika till Sverige. I egenskap av hjärnan bakom gärningsmannaprofilen skulle även han bli ett inslag i Sveriges mest omtalade kriminalhistoria. Mordet på Olof Palme.
Han var en i raden av så kallade ensamma galningar som pekades ut som Olof Palmes mördare. Året därpå kom en 49-åring och sen ännu en 42-åring. Anklagade utifrån en gärningsmannaprofil som enligt de amerikanska experterna inte går att använda i ett fall som Palmemordet.
I början av 90-talet reste journalister från SVT:s granskande tv-program Striptease, en föregångare till Uppdrag granskning, med Lars Borgnäs i spetsen, till USA för att intervjua just Robert Ressler. Ett program som var kritiskt till Palmeutredningen och dess metoder. Syftet var att undersöka om man verkligen kunde göra en gärningsmannaprofil på Palmes mördare och om mordet verkligen kunde ha begåtts av en ensam gärningsman. Programmets tes var att Palmemordet förmodligen handlade om något större än en ensamagerande gärningsman, nämligen en konspiration. Robert Ressler ansågs vara den främsta inom gärningsmannaprofilering. Och när SVT Striptease och Borgnäs träffar honom får han frågor om mordets karaktär.
So there are certain things that can be told about that offender, and there are certain assessments that can be made about that offender. But to construct a complete profile of his personality, there's insufficient information in this particular instance that you just can't make a profile.
It can't be done.
Can't be done.
Construct a complete profile? Nej, det är klart inte går. Det går väl inte att göra på någon. Inte ens ett brott som upprepas, som en seriemördares.
Let's admit it, it could be a totally mentally disturbed individual who's just out to kill somebody, but it's not likely because of the waiting, approaching from the rear and approaching in a location where immediately one steps to the left and they're off into an escape avenue. If it were just random, he may have gotten him in the movie theater right in front, where there was just no escape plan. There's too much of an escape plan here just to be a random shooting by a drug addict or a crazed individual.
Vem har föreslagit att Olof Palmes mördare är en totally mentally disturbed individual? Inte gärningsmannaprofilen eller någon representant för Palmeutredningen. En ensam agerande gärningsman eller en ensam varg är inte samma sak som en totalt mentalt störd person. Om det är vad journalisterna från SVT Striptease trodde, så har de missförstått. Vad fick egentligen Robert Ressler för frågor av de svenska journalisterna? I programmet framstår det som att Ressler avfärdar hela idén om att en gärningsmannaprofil kan göras på mordet på Olof Palme. It can't be done, framstår det som att Robert Ressler menar. Och det var ju märkligt, för detta var ju motsatsen till vad den svenska polisen med hjälp av FBI:s experter hade kommit fram till. Kanske dolde den svenska polisen något. Eller så kanske Striptease missförstod och misstolkade vad Ressler menade. Eller rent av kanske vinklade vad Ressler faktiskt sa. Vad var det då som Ressler egentligen sa? Efter att det här tv-programmet hade sänds blev granskningskommissionen själva förvånade. Så de åkte till USA och träffade Robert Ressler själva. Och så här säger Ressler ofiltrerat till granskningskommissionen när de besökte honom.
Ressler fully agreed with the conclusion that the murder of Olof Palme could not have been the result of a professional, well-executed conspiracy. In his view, terrorists and foreign intelligence agencies could be entirely ruled out in this context. He outlined 4 reasons to support this assessment: choice of weapon and ammunition. A Magnum revolver with a 6-inch barrel would never be used in a professional context. Quote, totally out of context of anything an organized group would use. According to Ressler, such a weapon draws far too much attention, primarily because of its loud report, but also due to its size. There are small pistols available that can be fitted with silencers and are just as effective. Using a revolver in the middle of a city, with the echo effects created by tall buildings, especially one that produces an especially loud sound in combination with this particular type of ammunition, is not something a professional assassin would choose. Ressler was also puzzled by the ammunition. Bullets of this kind can pass straight through multiple human bodies and may not cause more damage than a clean hole. If you're lucky, the victim could survive. A more deliberate and calculated plan would have involved using ammunition that remains in the victim's body and expands or explodes, resulting in a more lethal effect from the perpetrator's perspective, particularly if the shot is aimed at the head. When confronted with the argument that the ammunition might have been selected to penetrate a bulletproof vest, which could suggest professional preparation, Ressler dismissed the idea. If the shooter had wanted to guard against that possibility, it would have made more sense to fire a shot to the head using different ammunition. Ressler stated that the choice of weapon, a revolver with its noise and size, and the type of ammunition both pointed clearly to an amateur. Second placement of the shot. A professional assassin would have aimed for the back of the victim's head. Combined with appropriate ammunition, this would have been the simplest and most effective way to kill Olof Palme, if that was the intent. Ressler was confronted with an assessment previously presented to the commission by forensic pathologists, suggesting that the area the shooter actually targeted could be considered an optimal location to kill a person. Ressler acknowledged that this might be true if the shooter knew exactly what he was doing, but he still regarded such an approach as highly risky, very iffy, from the perpetrator's perspective, since it would be easy to miss. 3. That Lisbeth Palme was not killed. The perpetrator realized that Lisbeth Palme had seen him, yet made no effort to eliminate this witness, something a professional assassin would have done, as leaving a witness would be far too risky. It would have been easy to shoot Lisbeth Palme in the head as she sat next to her husband, and from the perpetrator's point of view, that would have been the rational course of action. If one assumes that the shot at Olof Palme was perfectly executed, then the shot fired at Lisbeth Palme must be considered careless, something that does not align with professional behavior. Ressler's impression, based on the description, was that due to the tension of the situation, the killer squeezed off another shot. In this case, the target was Olof Palme, and once that shot was fired, the killer may have deflated. At that point, he had kind of blown his bubble. Squeezing off another round would not be unlikely for a person like this in a state of excitement, Ressler concluded. 4th, choice of location. From the perpetrator's point of view, Ressler considered the location to be highly unsuitable, due to the number of people and cars in the area. While the site did have certain advantages, such as the fact that cars couldn't follow someone up the stairs of Tunnelgatan, these did not outweigh the major drawback, that many people could witness the event, which is exactly what happened. Ressler seemed to regard it as out of the question that a professional assassin would choose to act under such conditions. He also felt that the escape route only appeared ideal. In reality, it was extremely risky. The perpetrator could easily have run straight into someone. The fact that the escape was successful, according to Ressler, had nothing to do with skill. No skill involved. Ressler noted that Lisbeth Palme had not heard any gunshot sound near her. According to Ressler, this was a well-known phenomenon that even had a name: auditory exclusion. It is not uncommon for individuals who have experienced gunfire under extreme stress to report with certainty that they heard nothing. This applies even to police officers. Ressler stated that he had experienced this himself. Once, when he accidentally discharged a weapon, he saw the hole in the wall and smelled the gunpowder, but never heard the shot. These circumstances combined led Ressler to conclude that, from the perpetrator's perspective, the act was a high-risk crime. The perpetrator risked both failure and detection. On these grounds, he fully agreed with the profile's assessment that this crime could not have been the result of a professional operation. In a more speculative mode, Ressler also pointed to the circumstances surrounding the Grand Cinema, specifically the uncertainty around what the Palmes would do after the film ended, as further evidence that the situation was unsuitable from a professional assassin's standpoint. In general, Ressler emphasized that those who commit crimes of this nature in an organized manner seek to operate under conditions and in locations they can control, not, as in this case, be entirely at the mercy of the target's unpredictable behavior. When asked whether someone who kills on behalf of others must necessarily act professionally, referencing the example of James Earl Ray, who assassinated Martin Luther King, Ressler replied that little reliable experience exists with such cases. He personally did not believe in the idea of a hired amateur. There's no point in paying someone who doesn't even know what kind of weapon to use. Any group that would hire someone who then acts as Olof Palme's killer did must itself be disorganized. In general, Ressler endorsed the conclusions of the profile. On numerous points, he shared reflections that expanded on the profile's assessments, and in some instances, he added caveats. On a few key issues, he disagreed with the profile. Deviations. According to Ressler, the person described in the profile is not a psychopath, but rather someone with what he termed a borderline personality. In other words, the degree of personality disorder is not as severe as portrayed in the profile. It's a matter of gradation on a spectrum that begins with individuals suffering from personality disorders and ends with those who are fully psychotic. The behavior shown by Palme's perpetrator is too sophisticated for a psychotic person, Ressler argued. There is too much intricate behavior for a psychotic in this case. Still, it is consistent with what a disorganized killer is capable of. More typically, a psychopathic killer might have shot Olof Palme in or just outside the cinema entrance. This was Ressler's primary objection, one he returned to multiple times, though he emphasized that it did not significantly impact the overall assessment. A psychopathic offender, Ressler noted, would also typically have a documented history of violence by the age of 35 to 45, which he did not believe this individual had. The perpetrator might well have had other troubles with law enforcement, but not a background as a violent criminal. In this context, Ressler considered it entirely plausible that the perpetrator was what he called an authority killer, someone who, throughout life, had developed hostility toward figures of authority, father figures, school teachers, military commanders, employers, and who had gradually built up a deep resentment against any form of hierarchical control. He also found it highly unlikely that someone matching the profile would be a drug addict, and probably not an alcoholic either. According to Ressler, individuals of this type are deeply introverted and avoid social contact. Drug addiction typically requires some level of social interaction, unless the drugs are extremely easy to access, and a more outgoing lifestyle. In addition, this type of personality is typically marked by worsening depression that gradually gives way to paranoia. A paranoid individual fears losing control and will therefore avoid substances that cause that very loss. Psychologically, it is therefore improbable that the person described in the profile would be a substance abuser. General characterization. The personality type described in the profile and endorsed by Ressler can be broadly characterized as follows. The perpetrator likely struggled with relationships his entire life, particularly with figures of authority. In adulthood, his existence became increasingly shaped by personal failures. He is introverted, isolated, and suffers from a personality disorder, though not psychosis. His condition seems tied more to life circumstances than to any endogenous mental illness. As the years go by, with continuing failures and no success on the horizon, he sinks deeper into depression. The depression intensifies and takes on paranoid features, eventually growing into full-blown paranoia. When individuals of this kind commit acts of violence, they have not yet experienced the long-term failure, a condition that statistically peaks around age 37. By that point, when they don't see the end of the tunnel, don't see any luck coming in their life, they've been rejected so many times that they become these oddball loners. He becomes a withdrawn, brooding individual, ruminating over issues that don't truly concern him. He becomes the type that sits and broods over social issues that really don't affect him. In this way, he may develop an emotional interest in politics, linking his personal struggles to larger public issues that have no real bearing on his life. He might, for instance, fixate on things like the Harvard affair or the submarine incidents, topics currently discussed in the media. According to Ressler, the two defining traits one would expect from the perpetrator based on the profile are depression and paranoia. The condition likely worsened over time and probably continued to do so after the murder. The personality type described could easily live with this secret without ever confiding in anyone, something Ressler believed would not apply to a psychopath who would sooner or later reveal the crime to someone in their orbit. Suicide, Ressler said, is a distinct possibility. The profile categorizes him as a disorganized offender, correctly in Ressler's view. Ressler also had some objections to the profile's discussion of motive. Fundamentally, there is no clear motive here. Rather, what Ressler called a personal cause. He agreed with the profile's characterization of the act as driven by a personal, rather than private, motive, meaning that the source of the act lies in the perpetrator's personal circumstances. The profile proposes a man motivated by deep hatred for Olof Palme. Ressler thought it more accurate to describe it as a fixation or an irritation. Olof Palme represented what was irritating this guy in his life. Palme served, in Ressler's view, as a symbol, a scapegoat, for the perpetrator's own failures and frustrations. Additional considerations. Ressler was asked whether he considered the murder random, and whether it was likely that someone fitting the profile could act on such short notice, as would be the case if the perpetrator first spotted Olof Palme at the Grand Cinema at either 9 p.m. or 11 p.m., and then went into action. Ressler believed some conclusions could be drawn from this. For example, the perpetrator likely knew the area well, perhaps even lived or worked there. He also thought the personality type was consistent with committing a spontaneous, opportunistic crime. Clearly, what this was. The fact that Olof Palme often moved freely, without bodyguards, increased the likelihood of such a crime occurring. That diminished the randomness of the encounter. A person of this type might have mentally rehearsed attacking some authority figure, playing it over and over in his mind. In that sense, encountering Olof Palme could have triggered a crime the perpetrator was already psychologically prepared to commit. Someone else could easily have become the victim. Ressler agreed the encounter was random. But what surprised him most about the case was that the perpetrator managed to get away. That made this, in Ressler's view, something like the crime of the century. Given the profile and the type of person it describes, it was extraordinarily unlikely that the perpetrator would escape. When asked whether this didn't present a contradiction, if the perpetrator fits the profile, how did he manage to get away? Ressler agreed. But there is always the element of luck, he said. In his view, this was a coincidence, an even more improbable event than the initial encounter with Olof Palme. Sometimes things work when they shouldn't.